Today, I'm joined by Ryan Heckman, an Olympic athlete turned private equity investor who's redefining what it means to work with entrepreneurs and build companies. Ryan brings a deeply human-centered approach to private equity, challenging the conventional assets under management mentality. Here's what you're about to learn from Ryan. How Rallyday Partners, his company, is changing the private equity game by putting people first and not just focusing on financial returns. Why company culture is more than just words on paper, and how Rallyday builds it around each founder's vision to create lasting, meaningful growth. How his company supports personal growth at all levels so employees grow along with their companies, and key lessons that Ryan learned as a CEO working with private equity, and why he's reshaping the investor-founder relationship to be a true partnership based on mutual respect and support. Get ready to learn from an inspiring entrepreneur who's reshaping private equity to be as much about personal growth and purpose as it is about profit. Hey, Ryan, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on The Conscious Entrepreneur.
I'm psyched to be here, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Now, you have a really interesting story. In addition to having participated in the Olympics twice, you've done a ton of stuff in the business world, and I know that's really informed how you think about things today. So, today you're at Rallyday Partners, a private equity firm, but it was really interesting to learn that you've seen this from many angles. So you have both been on the PE or investor side. You've then started your own companies. You're back now in a PE role. So a lot of interesting stuff to share there with our listeners around what it means to work with a private equity in sort of investment backer, and the pros and cons and ins and outs of how one might do that. But within your company, Rallyday, today you guys take a very different approach than a lot of companies that many of us are aware of. And in particular, you talk about wanting to humanize the experience. Tell us a little bit as we start this conversation about what that means to you and why it's so important.
Well, I guess I would start with the stigma that goes with private equity as an asset class. And what I would say is well-earned behaviors that led to that stigma. I mean, I'm not sure many owners, operators out there necessarily want to partner with a private equity firm. It may be by default. The public markets used to be a place where a younger entrepreneur with a younger organization could get access to capital. And of course, with regulation, that went away. And so you're left with two choices: either stop growing or get a private equity investor. And so in many ways, I think people have accepted private equity as a necessary evil and not a force of goodness necessarily. And so for my partners and I, back in 2018, we asked that question of ourselves: how could we make private equity a source of goodness and not a necessary evil? That was a very fundamental question that we asked. And it became language that sounded something like, we want to humanize the experience. And so your question around what does that mean? I guess at its most basic level, a lot of private equity firms talk about managing assets. And they talk about how much assets under management, AUM is a term of art. And usually it's a size matters kind of thing where people say, what's your AUM? And you say, I manage $1 billion or something like that. So there's two problems with saying you manage assets for a living. First of all, management is a primitive form of leadership. It's as if to say that your role in the world is to manage something, not lead something. The difference is leadership is earned. Management is more of a compliance relationship. The other problem with that expression is managing assets is a very primitive form of looking at your role in the world. Humanizing the journey for us means that we're not managing assets, we're leading people. And so you could go up this in some sort of spectrum. You could say, some people say they manage assets, fine. Some people say they manage organizations. That might be slightly better. Some would say they manage teams. Some would say they manage people. We like to think we lead hearts, and that if we tap into the power of the heart, then the mind and the hands and the effort comes much more powerfully thereafter. And so we just think there's a tremendous opportunity to make the journey for entrepreneurs more fulfilling by leading with hearts and doing so through more of a leadership lens as opposed to a management lens.
And so how did that come to be meaningful and important to you? It would have been easy and straightforward to set up a, generic PE firm that just does assets under management and thinks of themselves as stewards of capital and stuff like that. You're approaching this to say we're leading hearts. We're connecting with the humans who are the entrepreneurs and the people at the companies that they're representing. Why did you decide that this was a time for a change in approach?
Well, I'd have to go back to the fact that I grew up in a really small town in the western part of Colorado. The population today is around 1,300 people, and more than half of the students in my classes were in the food lunch program. Most of their fathers and mothers were laid off from time to time. It was a mining community, a lot of furloughs and that kind of thing. And my mom was a school teacher. My dad was a scientist, and we were like the richest people in my town, which is so weird. But it was a very humble way to grow up with a lot of adversity around me. And I wouldn't have been in any lineup to be a private equity person. I thankfully got into sports, which got me exposed to more world-class thinking and got me, quote unquote, out of the small town, and gave me a higher expectation for myself, perhaps, than I had before. But truth be told, I got into private equity because I rode on an airplane with a guy who was doing private equity, and he told me that if I got a college degree someday, emphasis on if, that he would give me a job. And so that gave me a lot of energy to go to college when I didn't really necessarily have the academic background to even get into college. I was a competitive skier, which meant I was traveling for 200 days out of the year, and principally during school season. And so my grades were terrible, and I wasn't really equipped to go to college. But knowing that I might have a job offer on the other side made me highly motivated. And so I got into private equity right out of undergrad through the back door when I didn't necessarily deserve that kind of job. And so I have always felt from the beginning that I kind of maybe had to earn it a little bit more than my peers with better pedigrees, if you will. I did private equity for 15 years and made my way up through the ranks. It's a very difficult profession to advance in, very competitive and so forth. And I think the reason that I was able to do well was mostly because I always felt like I came in through the back door and I sort of acted like it, more plain spoken, more grateful, and certainly more humble than my peer group. But nevertheless, I got to a certain age where I was thinking about how I wanted to be remembered. And I was at a conference in Orlando, Florida, with a bunch of other private equity guys, probably 2,000 white males with a lanyard, all looking for the next great deal. And I was just looking around the sea of blue blazers, and it was just, I don't know, it was a sort of an existential feeling of, I got to get out of this. This is not why my parents, raised me, and I was also thinking, like, what do I want my kids to think about me and these kinds of things. So I sought the counsel of the CEOs that I had worked with over the years, that I had supported with my work as a private equity investor. And they all said the same thing, like really quickly, well, just go be a CEO. it sounds like, Ryan, you're looking for more fulfillment. You're looking for more of a leadership opportunity. Just go run a company. And, great advice, but not very actionable because I'm not sure anyone was going to hire me. My resume didn't reek of someone who knew how to run a company. And frankly, I didn't have a lot of confidence to do that necessarily. So I took their advice and I just bought a little business with 11 employees. And it was in healthcare, which I had done a lot of investing in the past. And I built that business into 450 employees, built a management team, and created a lot of value. Just round numbers, around 13.5 million of EBITDA from almost zero. And I kind of ran out of money. I wanted to do an add-on acquisition in Texas, and it was beyond my, my own personal net worth. So I reluctantly got a private equity investor, and that was really strange to be pitching to a private equity firm, after having been that person. And I am very grateful. A group in New York City called the Cortec Group acquired a majority interest in my business. I was able to close on the add-on acquisition that was really important to us strategically. And I reported to them as their CEO for 2 years. And that was kind of an out-of-body experience in many ways. And I learned firsthand just, how difficult it is for an entrepreneur to report to a private equity firm. And so ultimately, we hired my successor, and I had a year or two to kind of think about what I wanted to do next. And I ran into my two partners, Mark and Nancy, who had similar experiences being owned by private equity firms. And we all came to the conclusion that it was a necessary evil, but boy, what a privilege maybe to redesign the model. So we made a list of everything that was wrong with private equity, and it was a long list. And kind of put it into groups, and ultimately ended up with like 10 to 12 core challenges. And then, like any great entrepreneur, we just said, well, what's the innovation that we could bring to solve that problem? And we went to market with that business plan in September of 2019 and raised our first fund in about 6 months. The market was very receptive to our model from the investor standpoint. And we were in business. And we raised our second fund about 2.5 years later, another 200 million. So today we manage around $350 million of capital. And we're doing it uniquely, differently. And my two partners and I have all been CEOs. We've been founders of companies, and it helps us to connect with other founders much more intimately. It helps us be more helpful to our companies, and our founders that we support, I think, have a wholly different experience with us than they would from our peers, and we're really proud of that. I would say the biggest testament to this is, like, I would rather lose doing it this way than win doing it the old way. As it turns out, a lot of younger organizations have a kind of an evolution of their culture. A lot of founders will talk about their culture being a family, for example. You'll hear a lot of conversation around cultures being a happy place to work. And so your question is, I think there's two answers to it. One, we think that founders want to work with a firm with a really deep-seated sense of personal purpose, with a founder's focus, that's coupled with the ability to make very disciplined decisions with an architect's approach. The architect's approach is very important to founders because they don't want someone telling them what to do. That is not the job of a good private equity investor is there to empower, not to do the job of the CEO or the founder or their executive team, or worse yet, sit in the back seat and tell them what to do. So a lot of founders that we work with appreciate that we come to the table focusing on them as founders with an architect's approach, as opposed to looking at them as managing assets. and telling them what to do. So, I mean, that's a very low bar. But in terms of being successful and being a good partner, it's important that everyone at Rallyday shows up in the exact same manner behaviorally, so that every founder has a consistent experience with our firm. And that experience is very much focused on not managing assets, but giving a fulfilling experience to the founder.
I want to come back to something that you were talking about earlier, which was, you left your first PE job, bought a healthcare company, grew it to a sizable scale, and then went and got a PE investor yourself. And you said, "Oh, now I'm on the other side, like figuring out what it's like to be a CEO reporting up to a PE firm." What was that like? And specifically though, what's different with the current approach? So, by founders for founders is one of the slogans of Rallyday today. I'm sure that was informed by that experience, but help us get a sort of more colorful picture of what's actually different there.
Yeah, I'll do a compare and contrast, and I'll do it through a little bit of storytelling. But we closed our transaction with the private equity firm when I sold my business on December the 16th, right before the holiday season. My CFO, Kathy, and I were really tired at the end of that process. It's about a 3-month thing, and you're trying to manage the day-to-day business while doing this transaction. And I think a lot of people that are listening to this podcast can sympathize with how difficult that is. And we closed on December 16th. We had our first meeting with the new owners, the private equity firm, on January the 6th. And, I'm not sure what I expected, but the entire 6 hours was spent on our financial performance in December. Now, the problem with that was a couple-fold. One, our CFO, Kathy, was so tired that I told her that if she showed up at work for inside of 2 weeks, I was going to fire her. Now, that's kind of a joke, but the point was that I didn't want her to work for 2 weeks. She needed to recharge her batteries, reconnect with her family, enjoy the Christmas holiday, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't have our books closed by January 6th. And, our visibility into the metrics of the business were not great, because neither Kathy nor I had worked very much from the 16th of December to January 6th. And so, our first conversation was Kathy on her cell phone with me at a conference room table with 4 private equity guys, asking us what our results were in December, and us calling our controller and the people who had access to our patient management system for volume numbers by clinic and by doctor and by service line. And we weren't prepared, mind you, and that's maybe on us, but it just didn't feel, first of all, we felt stupid. And second of all, it wasn't a very good use of 6 hours, and it certainly didn't create a lot of mutual admiration and trust,
Right.
And these are great people. The private equity firm that we were with, they're great people, really good integrity, but they just look at the world through a financial statement. And that's just is what it is. So that was my personal experience. Let me tell you what happens at Rallyday. So at Rallyday, our first day with a founder, we find out from that founder what their personal goals are, beyond the business. And we kind of start there. And then we talk about the organizational goals. And we try to get them out of goal setting even and into dream making, which is a wholly different way of engaging the heart, maybe your right brain, maybe even a spiritual dimension. Like, how do they want to be remembered in 5 years, both personally and organizationally? We have an expression here that we use all the time, which is the objective is professional, but the journey is personal. And so we spend that first day together dreaming about what we can build together. And that just creates a lot of mutual connection and understanding. And then when we tie it to their personal goals, which sometimes are very personal, maybe they've neglected their kids for the last 10 years building their business. Well, it's really good for us to know that. It's good to find out how they like to communicate. Is it once a week? Is it, what day of the week, and anyway, it's a big discovery session around what success and fulfillment means to them very personally and professionally. And then finding out from them how we can accelerate and further their goals. So it's a lot of listening. So that's our first day. So it gives you a sense.
Yeah, totally different.
Then the second thing we do is we actually go in and we interview as many stakeholders as we can to find out from the customers, suppliers, employees, the leadership team, what does the company need to do to fulfill their needs? This gets into purpose. So purpose work is really important. Purpose is what catalyzes discretionary effort. It's what attracts great talent. Meaningful work and being part of meaningful work is what really drives the human heart to do extraordinary things. And organizationally, we get to a real sense over about a month by interviewing all the stakeholders, the company's core purpose. And that becomes foundational in terms of then what we try to build. The second thing we do is once we've got the purpose nailed, then we say, all right, what strategy do we need to put in place that's going to be in service to that purpose? And we'll spend a couple days on strategy. And then once we do the strategy, we then get into another module on culture, which is to say, all right, if you want to go from a $10 million organization to a $100 million organization, and that's sort of like a rudimentary dimension of a strategy, what changes do we think we need to make to the culture so that we can get there more safely, attract the right people, the right leaders that will empower us to get there? And then the last module is all about leadership development. And this is very important. This is all about helping the leadership team and the employees, emphasis on the employees, grow personally as the business grows, and maybe as big. So I say maybe because, let's just say that during our ownership period, the business is 3 times its size when we're done. So the big kind of dreamy question is, what if we could help the employees and the leadership team grow as people 300% during our time together? And that's a really big goal, but what a beautiful expression of commitment to their personal lives than to say, how can we help you grow personally along with the business? Because they'll perform better for the business, but also when they go home, they're better moms and dads and friends and spouses and so forth. And that's the humanizing part of this whole thing. And the cool thing that happens is that when people grow, the business grows almost by default.
Yeah. The way that I always talk about it is building entrepreneurial capacity, right? So meaning if I'm a low capacity person, or if I have a quote unquote governor on my system that's slowing me down, and this could be, my own stuff, limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome, burnout, low energy, something physical, something relational, whatever. If I have low capacity, then guess what? The business is simply not going to grow to the same extent. It's not going to flourish to the same extent as if I'm in a place of, health and energy and abundance and feeling good. Then I'm just going to be able to do more in the world, right? I can get more done. I can manifest more. I can be more creative. I can, get out there and build things. And I always use those words, entrepreneurial capacity, right? Like we all have a certain amount, but what you're talking about is really building that into your ethos to say, this is part of how we work with a team. Once we bring a team on, we want to make sure that everybody's understanding that we can help plug them in so they become better humans along the way.
I really like that notion of entrepreneurial capacity. The only thing I would add to it is just, human capacity, because not everyone in a company is an entrepreneur, and there's
Sure.
a lot of emphasis. I mean, if you type in the word leadership into Amazon's book catalog, I would dare say 95% of the leadership content that we can read is meant for the C-suite. And very little of it is designed for frontline employees who are actually delivering the product or service or making the product, as the case may be. And so one of the things we're really proud about is the amount of resources and investment that goes into how do we help all the employees in the company grow and not just the people in the C-suite. And something really magical happens when the leadership team has what you're calling, which is more entrepreneurial capacity, while at the same time the workforce has a greater maybe growth mindset and is learning how to be better versions of themselves along the way. When those meet in the middle, it amplifies all of the work that we're doing, and we go that much faster. And I also think there's something to be said for when our time is done and our asset class requires us to enter a business and exit in about 5 years. So a question could be said or posed, what are the outcomes of those 5 years? And certainly we've got a financial outcome. We'd love to return, investor capital back to the people who entrusted us with their capital. I mean, nothing feels better. And that's clearly the way our industry is structured. But when you think about the wake behind us, there's other outcomes that are even more fulfilling. Another one is in most of our portfolio companies, the founder retains 30 to 40% of the company, and we invest to acquire the balance. And so another really fulfilling opportunity for us is like, how big can we make that for them? What if the second bite of the apple, so to speak, was even bigger than the first? And that's pretty special. Another thing is, in some of our companies, we go very deep with employee ownership. And, what if the next exit event, when we're done, helps people buy that home they wanted, or maybe it sends one of their kids to college, or, whatever adds to their personal lives through the wealth that is created. Another one that we're really proud of, and I'll end with it, is just, are the people that entrusted us with their business, are they better people at the end of those 5 years than in year one? And that is very difficult to accomplish. It's also hard to measure. But that it's one of our aspirations, I guess, is what's central to this conversation, is that, again, going back to your first question, what do we mean by humanizing private equity? Well, that last dimension of how we define success is certainly a big part of it.
Awesome. I want to wrap up with a question linked back to what you were just talking about. When we talk about the founders, the executives having entrepreneurial capacity, and you said, and then if we can match that with a real growth mindset from everyone else in the company, it's amplifying the results. So it's really increasing the size of the pie, so to speak. What are your go-to resources, guides, books, frameworks? Like, how do you actually make that work? Do you show up with a certain philosophy behind this that says here's a methodology that we really like, or what areas have you drawn inspiration from in order to help unlock that growth mindset and help people to really excel in their 5-year journey with you?
Well, it's a good question. Funny enough, when it comes to leadership training for frontline employees, one of the first barriers you have to get through is convincing them that they deserve it.
Oh.
If you just think about typical work, the first thing that an employee does when they get to work is punch in their time clock.
Mm-hmm.
the last thing they do is punch out their time clock. And in between, they're being told what to do most of the time. And that's not a very inspiring way to live. And in some cases, maybe they didn't have an abundance of role models. Maybe they didn't go to college. Maybe they didn't do well in school. Maybe they just don't have great self-esteem. And I think what's interesting to me is, the first job in leadership development is to make sure that people feel the pride in themselves first, that they feel like they deserve to grow. And so giving them that permission to invest in themselves and that encouragement that they do deserve it, and that we have great dreams for them, that may be even beyond their own dreams of themselves. That's job number one.
That's a pretty big mindset shift.
Yeah. And it sounds so simple, but it's central to the rest of it. You can't have a good teaching moment until you first created a good learning moment, and so that's job number one. When you ask about frameworks and so forth, when we talk about architecture, we really have drawn on the profession of architecture. And if you think about a great, beautiful building that maybe comes to your mind, maybe a capital in a city that you really admire, maybe it's a skyscraper in New York City, maybe it's a building from the Renaissance in Florence, whatever comes to your mind, you have to go back in time and think whether there was a developer, there was someone with a capital who was going to build this building, but there was an architect by that developer's side who was in charge of making sure that that building was designed to meet the utility that was desired. So,
Right.
Hospital has hospital rooms, surgical facility and capacity, so forth and so on. The building needs to be durable. It has to stand the test of the elements. The building has to be, have structural integrity. The building has to have good HVAC system. It has to have, I could keep going on and on. The most special thing, though, about a good architect is able to create meaning when someone sees that building. There's an emotional arousal that occurs when you see something that's that beautiful. You could use words like breathtaking, for example. It takes your breath away when you see that building. And so when we think about business building, we come at it with this architectural approach, which is to say it needs to be all of these things, but it also has to have meaning. And so a lot of our work is centered around creating meaning in organizations. We have a lot of frameworks. The test for a good framework is that it's simple to learn, simple to teach, and easy to execute, especially under stress. And so leadership training for us should err on the side of being very simple, because it's easy to teach, it's easy to learn, and it's easy to execute. There's nothing harder than reading a 400-page book on leadership, and then you get in that moment of truth when you need to do what it told you to do over 400 pages, and you can't remember if it was page 12 or page 380 or which chapter it was or whatever.
Yeah.
So we have purposely built all of our frameworks to be simple on the other side of complex, to borrow a phrase from Albert Einstein. But I could give you some examples, but it might take too long. But
this is a great conversation, and it's a real view into an area that not a lot of entrepreneurs get a front row seat for, right? To understand what's it like inside the PE world, what's it like to sell to a PE company, to work with a PE company, what standards do you as investors hold yourselves to? So this is really fascinating to hear, and I got to say, at least based on my experience, no one else uses the words that you use. No one else is talking in the language that you're talking when they're talking about inspiring hearts and working so deeply with people and helping people to thrive. So, hey, Ryan Heckman, I just want to say thanks so much to you for coming here and sharing all this stuff with us. And thanks to the model that you're putting together with Rallyday to really rethink PE ownership.
Yeah, I might want to end with like what do they call it? A shameless plug? Is that,
that's what they
the
call
expression?
It. Yeah.
So come to find out, there's an organization called Conscious Capitalism that was started by the founder of Whole Foods, John Mackey, and the founder of the Container Store, Kip Tyndall. And their big idea was to promote stakeholder capitalism, promote the importance of purpose, and to promote more of an employee-centric mindset within organizations. And all I can say is I wish that I had met these guys when we started Rallyday, because I could have saved like a ton of time designing Rallyday. You can go to their website. It's very consistent, by the way, Alex, with the work that you're doing, and I'm so proud of the work that you're doing, by the way, and it's so important. But we're actually launching a Conscious Capitalism chapter in Colorado. It's our gift, I guess, to the community. And we hope that the things that we talked about today, they've been codified in a curriculum by Conscious Capitalism, and we hope that we can provide more access to those business principles in Colorado more readily by bringing that platform here. So we're launching the chapter in September, and more to come on that. But you can go to their website to learn more.
Fantastic, and that really is a great gift that you're offering there to the Colorado community, and we look forward to following that. Well, Ryan Heckman, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you again for all the work that you're doing out there. It's awesome.